I'll hold it down here. Welcome back from the break. We are at the final stretch of our day. We have one last presenter. Not last, definitely not. We're about to talk about, but I'm not doing good. It's okay though. Prior to the company he's currently at, Yashar worked in Advanced Sensor Technology Group at SAIC on novel biome censoring for DARPA. Yashar is a two-time UCSD alum. Okay, we already said that part. And he is here to tell us how our cell phone, this device, most of you guys have better ones than mine, that's fine, I'm still a BlackBerry fan, could be more important than our doctor. Now, I hope you guys will help me get him in trouble when we do have a doctor on the premises, because I promised to do that during the panel. But with that being said, Yashar, thank you for being here this afternoon.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm actually very excited to be back at UCSD. I spent 10 years at UCSD, and every time I say that, people think I was a super senior undergrad. But no, actually, I got 2 degrees in that time. I got an undergrad degree and a graduate degree from the bioengineering department. I did my research in fMRI, but particularly focused on biosignal analysis. And worked at SAIC for a number of years doing various different types of sensor systems and really kind of DNA, fingerprinting techniques. Couple interesting things. Director of Informatics is mainly a made-up title. You get to do that when you're in a startup. You get to make up your own titles. It's kind of great. Proteus is actually, is an analogy we talked about a little bit earlier, is the submarine from the movie Fantastic Voyage, which we alluded to earlier. So it kind of gives you a little bit of insight to what Proteus is about, and I'll talk about that in depth and what we're trying to do. And something else I'm very proud of is I was a co-founder of the UCSD Entrepreneur Challenge in my last year that I was here, and I believe it's in its 6th year now. We've given out $300,000 and something to students or companies, and those companies have gone on to raise, I think, millions in subsequent rounds. So very proud of that fact. I'm here to represent industry. I'm here to represent UCSD alums and what we can do outside of UCSD, and I'm also here to represent the startup thinking and kind of disruptive thinking as an entrepreneur. So I have some ground rules for my presentation. Unlike a lot of other presentations, I want you to take out your phone, your laptop, your tablet, everything you have, put it on your desk, open your favorite Twitter client, follow me at @4lee. I want to see some comments. I know how I already took a count. I got names, so I want to make sure I get some followers after this, or I'll track you down. So before talking about the future and of mobile health and how we can use that in a global context, I'm going to take a little bit of a historical perspective and think about how our current system got to where it's at. And it really was based out of the need in the early 1900s around acute care. The biggest problems of the day were people getting acutely sick and dying. So what do? We built acute care centers. We trained people to be specialists and to work in a really cost-intensive way to treat people. Well, today, what we deal with is very different. And we've heard from speakers earlier that the conditions we're dealing with now are chronic in nature. They're global in nature. And if you look at some of the numbers, they're just unbelievable. 320 million people with diabetes, 25% of the global healthcare costs. And the prevalence is rising. And as urbanization and these different forces come to developing countries, this problem is just going to get much worse. And one of the fundamental problems is access. We talk about the U.S. system, and we talk about hospital infrastructures and doctors and insurers and providers, but that doesn't exist for most of the world, right? It's kind of irrelevant to most of the rest of the world. They have no access. You can't train enough doctors. You can't build enough hospitals in China, in India to deal with the problems they have. Fundamentally, there's a problem with access. There's also an issue with value and integrity. A third to half of the drugs sold in developing countries are counterfeit. I mean, that's probably something a lot of people don't know. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies just stay out of the game. They don't sell drugs in those markets because they're afraid of the repercussions. That's a lot of dead babies in those developing countries. So how do we deliver things and maintain their integrity to these different parts of the world? Another question becomes value. So we prove the efficacy of drugs within very controlled circumstances, within clinical trials that are monitored. There's people calling you up and making sure you're following your therapeutic regimen, but it doesn't happen in the real world. People might not have access to drugs all the time. They might not know how to take them. I mean, I've been in the field a lot in my role talking to patients, and you'll be amazed the gap that exists in education. I mean, I've talked to type 2 diabetics, I thought they caught it from their friend because they use their glucometer. I mean, and these are not, cases. I mean, you laugh, but these are real cases, and this is, people are getting sick and not treating themselves the right way because they don't fundamentally understand. They don't understand the value of the drugs and what's being delivered to them. So it begs the question: how do we deliver value to everyone, everywhere? And how do we do this in a sustainable way? It seems pretty insurmountable given the kind of what we've looked at, right? But interesting enough, there's examples. Tech has already solved this. So I'm being a little controversial here, but if you take a look a peek at what tech has done, you go to sub-Saharan Africa, you go to India, you go to all these different countries, the mobile internet reaches these folks. And it reaches these folks more than it does clean water or paved roads. There's 4 billion cell phones in the world. Technology has figured out how the logistics of delivering the technology, the education of letting them how to use the technology, the infrastructure needed to do that, and they've been able to monetize it. Been able to monetize the solution to people that make less than $2 a day. So how come healthcare can't do this? Well, maybe it can. So what does that mean locally? I mean, locally, we have all these global trends. We've seen tech is in these different areas and making money and delivering solutions and really enabling technologies that are going to change lives in those geographies. Locally, what we're seeing is a convergence of 5 central themes. The consumer web mobile environment. So here's just a few companies in that space within the healthcare space. Apple is being hugely successful. Smartphones being hugely successful. It's because they're consumerized. They're thinking about the user experience. They're thinking about how people use their products. They're delighting people beyond the technology. Technology alone is not the solution, and we'll look in depth about how Proteus is dealing with that and other companies in the space. There's a huge movement in personal health monitors. People call this the quantified self movement. They call this personal informatics. It's people themselves, consumers themselves, paying for devices to better understand their own healthy behaviors and how they can best augment them. So we talk about provider pay. What about consumer pay? You provide a compelling product that delivers real value, consumers will pay for it. Social networks, we're very familiar. Everyone here is probably Facebook. But these social networks are also developing within the patient context. Patients Like Me is an amazing place. You go if you're sick. I think it was originally started with someone whose brother died of MS. But they just published a paper a few years ago looking at side effects and different drugs and the effect of those things, purely sourced from the crowd. Data sharing. So we have huge initiatives. Microsoft Health Vault is basically moving out in front of a lot of folks and doing a personal health record. They're aggressively integrating large hospital systems, and they're doing it for free. Why? Because they see the value of the data and aggregating that data. And we'll move forward from that and talk about data analytics and the real value, I think, of what's going on with all these different things, is convergence on the analysis and what you actually do with that data. We'll talk about that. So there are a lot of organizations feeding this movement. We heard this morning from Dr. Matthews about the West Wireless Health Institute and what they're doing. And San Diego is really uniquely positioned, UCSD especially, is really uniquely positioned to deliver a lot of value, bring a lot of value to this field, because we have the wireless industry and over hundreds of life biotech companies in the same space. UCSD has, I think, does a really good job of bringing disciplines together, and you'll see the solutions for a lot of these problems become bringing disciplines together and really thinking innovatively around these products. So Qualcomm Wireless Health, Continuum Health Alliance, West Wireless Health Institute are all in San Diego, all based here and really helping push things forward. A couple of interesting other organizations. Rock Health is an organization in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they're a mobile and digital health incubator. So they just launched their first class a few months ago, but these are people from the internet domain, founders of Twitter and people from engineers from Facebook and all these guys putting money up to as a nonprofit to help companies and seed companies and build digital health solutions. If you're interested in just getting news and knowing what's going on, Mobile Health News, I'm going to give a nod to them. They're an excellent news aggregation source. Really see what's going on. You can see who's getting funded. You can see what the challenges are that companies are facing, and really get a really deep, in-depth view of what's going on in digital health. The Quantified Self is a meetup group. It's organized by a bunch of enthusiasts, technology enthusiasts, who are looking at how do I measure things about myself. And you're starting to see people within this movement or enthusiasts spinning out companies and coming up with novel technologies and really kind of taking a consumer-centric view of developing health applications. So This is a kind of a snapshot from the ROC report, from ROC Health, of the state of digital health. In the first half of 2011, 35 digital health companies had received more than $2 million. And this is not a lot of money for each of these companies, but a few years ago, they were getting nothing, right? So it's an explosion of funding within this space. The venture capitalists are very keen on this, and there's a lot of different types of companies in this space working on personal health records, integration, sensor systems, and we'll take a little deep dive on some of these companies as well. But it's something that's blowing up, and VCs are taking note. They're starting incubators. You know, it's a very active space. This is a nod to the personal informatics movement. This is just a. Okay, I told you to put your cell phone on your table, right? So there you go. So these are just a bunch of different devices that currently exist, that are in the marketplace, that are driving positive behavior change in one way or another, and augmenting health. You guys may be familiar with a lot of these. Nike Plus, very simple sensor system, just basically measures when your foot strikes the ground, and from that you can get pace and distance and everything. But what's compelling about this is that they really focus on the user experience. How do we engage the end customer? How do we drive behavior change for healthy behaviors? And really looking at game dynamics in this space. And I think that's going to be an important theme as well, is you have information, you have sensors, but then you have to have an application layer on those to really drive user adoption and really make them usable. There's a slew of consumer-centric devices coming out. This is the Fitbit. This is a startup called Bases. This is actually just from Jawbone, the guys that make the Bluetooth headsets. They're coming out with an accelerometer-enabled bracelet, essentially. And using the 3-axis accelerometer, people are doing some, higher-level processing and coming up with activity levels, but also sleep. You can measure and quantify sleep, and that's very important, actually, in a lot of different therapeutic areas. We're familiar with connected glucometers and blood pressure monitors. A couple interesting ones up here, actually. This is from a company called Emotive up in San Francisco. They have an open source EEG hardware and software system. For $200, you can get this device and get a full SDK to look at your brain waves and analyze them and use them for whatever applications you like. Zio is a sleep monitoring system that uses a single electrode EEG. I think it's about $200. Interesting thing about this device is, it's basically an alarm clock thing that sits there. It tells you how well you slept the previous nights, and you can trend it. But the value to Zio is now, because it's in the consumer space, they have the largest database of EEGs and sleep data in the world, right? And they didn't have to get Graves grant money to get it. People paid them to give them that data. And that data is going to be immensely valuable moving forward. A couple other applications. This is a mobile application on the iPhone that actually uses the microphone to do respiratory analysis. Right? So you don't need a fancy stethoscope necessarily. If you have the simple sensors that sit on board on your devices, you can start getting that information. And people in the developing countries are using very simple sensors on the phone to do these diagnoses and zoom in and do the interaction. Here's another application that's a poor man's pulse ox on the smartphone. It uses the camera, stick your finger on the camera. It uses the flash, looks at small changes in the contrast of your skin, and gives you your heart rate. Right? You don't need a pulse ox anymore. It's in your phone. So it's really interesting how people are using using the sensors in your phone in a very novel way, in a really low-cost way to deliver value to the end users. So Proteus, what do we do, and why are we special and uniquely positioned in this space? So Proteus's vision is intelligent medicine. And fundamentally, we take a different approach than most companies do in the biomedical space. Most companies in the biomedical space take little technical risk and they take clinical risk. I have a pacemaker technology that I understand. I'm going to pace something else. I'm going to pace the stomach and control obesity. I'm going to pace the vagal nerve and control epilepsy. I'm going to do these different things. At Proteus, we take a fundamentally different look. We go after proven therapies, things that we know work, molecules that are proven, efficacious, and we wrap sensing and information around those to actually bring up their full value in the real world. To that end, we've developed two key pieces of technology that exist and are real and will be commercialized in 2012. The first piece of that is the adjustable event marker. It's a small sensor, about 1 millimeter cube, that sits on top of this pill. It's the same pill right here. And upon ingestion, this little sensor turns on. It sends a unique identifier that identifies the pill that's been swallowed. So this is 200 milligrams of Lipitor that was swallowed on this day. Here's a full supply chain information. It was built on this day. This is where it came from, and the whole nine. That gets picked up by a smart Band-Aid. The smart Band-Aid not only acts as a receiver for the signal, but it has a full ECG channel. So I get your heart rate variability. You can derive respiration from RR interval modulation. It's got a 3-axis accelerometer. I know your body position. I know your activity. We can derive step counts. We can measure your sleep, right? All that goes via Bluetooth to your cell phone. And through different applications on the cell phone, to the user, to their caregivers, and to other people to continue with care, that information is there. So imagine the paradigm today when you go to your doctor, he prescribes you a molecule, you walk away, you come back 6 months later, have you been taking your meds? Everyone says yes. It's like going to the dentist. Everyone says they've been flossing, right? You didn't floss for 3 months, and the day before you flossed 16 times just to like catch up. Patients is the exact same thing, right? Everyone says yes. The doctor sees that there's no therapeutic effect. He changes the regimen. Blindly at sometimes, you know, but it gives you comfort, gives the doctor comfort, everyone's happy. But now imagine walking in, the doctor bringing up, you know, you're sharing your report on your smartphone. This is when I took my meds. This is when I slept. This is my activity levels. You know, these are how all everything's correlated together. Okay, now I can make an informed decision. Maybe the therapy I'm giving you, it doesn't have an effect. Now I need to up your dose. Maybe it's the regimen. You know, maybe it's just you're not being compliant. So let's figure out how to incentivize you to be compliant. You know, we have a tendency to blame people for not being compliant, but I would blame the design. You know, the pill is not a very engaging user experience. You know, take this, call me later. No, that's not the way it should be. It should be, take this, let me incentivize you to take this, and if you're not taking it, let me design a system in which motivates you to take it, right? So you can see the value of it. So it's really on us as designers and engineers to deliver value and an engaging customer experience to drive adoption. So how does the Proteus system work? I kind of alluded to this already. Within the pill, there's the IEM, the ingestible event marker, as we refer to it. It marks the pill ingestion event. It contains supply chain information, and what it allows you to do is authenticate the dose form. So thinking in developing world scenarios, you can verify this is a real pill and exactly what you're taking before you take it. You know, that's a huge value to people in the space and also to pharmaceutical companies that want to do this. The mode of operation is what we call transconduction. So everybody can think back to elementary school days or junior high when you did this experiment where you have a potato, stick a couple of electrodes in it, and it powers something. Well, that's essentially what we've done. We've taken an IC, small chip, with some control circuitry. We've layered the electrodes on that chip, and you yourself are the potato. So when you ingest this, it creates a current. We modulate that current, it modulates through your body, conducts through your body. It's kind of like a modulated ECG waveform. Pick it up on your skin with a bioamplifier, just like an ECG, and we can tell exactly what information that contains. It's inherently safe. It's not RF. It's not transmitting. It's contained within your body. You have to be on or in the body to pick up that signal. Talks to our patch. I've mentioned this before, but we have an ECG channel, heart rate variability from the accelerometer, activity, steps, position, temperature, sleep, and we have a Bluetooth link that talks to your mobile phone, talks to a cloud. I think everyone uses the same icon from Windows. And from there, what we want to really create is we have application layers that we're creating, but we're actually creating an open API to all developers. If you have the right permissions, the user grants you permissions, you can develop an application on top of our data stream. So maybe you're creating a unique visualization of here we're showing, you know, people transitioning through different states throughout the day. You know, maybe you want to create a patient caregiver network so that information is shared. If my information is shared with my caregiver or my parents who are elderly and sick and can't take care of themselves at some regard, they're not. They're actually in the back. They're fine. But they can share their information with me, and I can intervene. Right? I mean, if we think about who's the first line of defense and being sick is first is you, it's self-care, and then it's your caregiver. Those are the people really facing the burden of healthcare, right? And then your doctors, you know, episodic, you need to see them every 6 months. We'll talk about this a little bit about more, but a lot of people are doing really interesting things around gamification. This is not necessarily creating games with data, but it's using game dynamics with the data to get people to engage in healthier behavior, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. There's clinician and clinical trial tools. We've done multiple clinical trials across multiple therapeutic areas, and we provide these patient panels to doctors to allow them to see when their patients have taken their meds, how active they are, and how they're trending. And by being able to triage their panel effectively by the use of these metrics, it can make them more efficient. The person I know that's doing well and is taking their meds, I don't need to see and spend as much time with. The person that's not, I need to intervene. And for clinical trials, it fundamentally changes how those are run. Right now, you can't tell the difference between a non-responder and someone who's non-compliant in a clinical trial. Right? So you have to have bigger ends. It's more expensive. You have the statistics to flush that out. Well, you can tell that. We talked to the FDA, and they're very interested in this because if you think about how clinical trials are done, you do a clinical trial on, say, 10,000 patients, you show that it's safe, and then the next day you're in 1 million people. Well, those really low frequency occurrences of side effects or death aren't seen until you get to 1 million people. Well, with a system like this, you can have rolling clinical trials. You can just monitor everybody as the drug comes out. You couple a sensor to every drug that gets really released, and you have better safety data before you roll to millions. So you do rolling clinical trials. It's better for the FDA, it's better for the drug companies. Then analytics. Here's just an example of a study we did in which we measured different continuous blood pressure measurements and different diuretics, essentially. And we can, from that, look at dose response. What is your response to this drug, temporally, and we can adjust everything based on that. So here's just a data dump for the engineers out there. But from the sensor system, you can pick up unique IDs, and these are all individual ingestions that are picked up. You can look at total activity and step count and position, and from that derive sleep cycles. You can look at heart rate throughout the day. You can look at temperature, and there's a lot of data here that we can mine. But if I showed a patient this data, they wouldn't know what to do with it, right? So data and information is not the end. What's the end is being able to use these in a meaningful way to affect behavior change. So we have this very simple model that we use, and it's simplified in a lot of ways, but it's the believe, no act principle. So consumers need to believe that therapy will work, and that's mainly done through framing and giving educational prompts to people. They need to know what they do, and they must be prompted to act at the right times. So it's about putting the right contextual prompts on the path of a patient when they're sick to be able to effectively change their behavior at the right time. And we use information to drive that, but information is not the end all. And gamification is interesting, and this is a funny thing that I like. It's because when you're sick, reality is the worst game ever, right? I mean, what are you looking at? You can play endlessly. You're looking at your prognosis, which is a bad prognosis. You don't want to deal with that, right? I mean, one interesting, we're in the Silicon Valley, and we talked to some game guys from Zynga, and we're also working with Novartis and enabling some of their transplant drugs, right? Transplant. You get a transplant. If you don't take your immunosuppressive, you will die, right? 80% compliance on medication regime. Farmville. You visit your fictitious farm, your tomatoes grow. 90% adherence. Right? There's something wrong in that equation, but there's also something to be learned in that equation. You got to make things, you got to make your experience engaging. You got to gamify it in some ways to get people to not think about the outcomes, but to think about the incentives they receive to get to better behavior. And we have a lot of different mechanisms we're playing with. We're working with the pharmaceutical companies, Novartis mainly, on a system called MedMatch, which is really leveraging altruism. So if you take a pill, Novartis will donate a pill to somebody else into some other distant geography. So the folks that don't have a good prognosis can still be motivated to stay adherent on the altruistic nature of that program. We have goal-setting mechanisms. We have leveling mechanisms that help you bring through different stages, and you're incentivized through rebates and through your insurers and insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. And it's fundamentally changing kind of the business models, and we'll talk about that. So that's great, and but there's some really hardcore analytics behind all this too that we're developing. And the reason companies like Facebook or Zynga and companies in the internet space are really successful is because they have a lot of good analytics around their users. They know exactly what you do, what you respond to, and how in a temporal fashion. And they tune their system continually to match that. We want to do the same thing in the healthcare space. And we're going to leverage a lot of different data sources. So there's data sources from sensors, but there's also behavioral changes. If we try to incentivize you with something and you don't respond, well, we know that behavioral prompt doesn't work for you. So we're going to try some different ones in an adaptive fashion until we find the right behavioral prompts. It's taking those sensors, it's extracting the core data. So it's taking a raw ECG waveform and understanding that we want to look at heart rate, we want to look at QT interval elevation, we want to look at all these different parameters that are meaningful in different therapeutic contexts. We want to extract those features, we want to reduce the data set to have a meaningful feature vector. And that gives us an ability to kind of assess your current state. How are you doing from a physiologic, therapeutic, behavioral aspect right now? We take all those things and understand the temporal state relationships. How do you progress through these different states? And that allows us to build history and context across multiple streams, behavioral, physiologic, and therapeutic. Lots of companies are doing this piece. I understand your physiology. I understand where it's going, but they don't have a link back to the therapy. I don't know if your physiology changed because you didn't take your med. I don't know if your physiology changed because you ate something salty. I have no clue. But you need all that information to build the right context. And then from that, and understanding the behavioral change mechanisms that work, you can then feed that back to the system or the person and help them get better. Now, we talked about that this has to be done in a sustainable way. We have sensors, we have all these things that are presumably going to add cost to the system. The sensor that we have embedded in this medicine is based, we can make 100,000 of these on a wafer, $1,000 wafer. It's essentially free, fractions of a penny. This is a disposable that our target price at commercial launch is less than $10. We're partnered with Avery Dennison, which many of you guys may know from as label makers, but they're in the bandage business. They're in the RFID business. They're going to make these at mass scale for everyone. So how does a business model work? We talk about technology disruption, technology innovation, but for a lot of these things to work, you also need business model disruption. You need delivery mechanism disruption. So if you look at a traditional farm model, this is obviously schematized for the purposes of this talk, but it all looks like that. But in a traditional farm model, you spend a lot of money up front to try to get your drug approved, right? You get your patents filed, you get it out to market, you do the clinical trial things, you may be around here, you market it, and then you have a limited time to sell that product because then you hit a patent cliff, and then you lose all revenue as generics come in, right? It's not a very sustainable model for the pharmaceutical companies, and as markets get smaller and R&D costs get more and the regulations become stronger, this part gets bigger, this part gets smaller, unsustainable. Now, if we take an intelligent medicine approach and it's actually a generic approach for systems approach, think of companies that have systems that they offer as products. Apple, for instance. They sell you hardware, but then they sell you songs, they sell you services, they sell you all these different things. This is where the pharmaceutical market is going. By having intelligent medicine systems, you can shorten the time to develop drugs by shortening the amount of clinical trial work you have to do by being able to get better statistics. Adoption rate's the same, and then over time, you don't actually face a patent cliff because people are engaged with your system on different levels. There's an app on their phone that helps them maintain compliance. There's an app on the phone that tells them when they're drifting and coming back. They have links to their caregivers because the app facilitates that, right? They're not going to change their drug, and the delivery mechanism is going to be very different. I mean, if you look at, Walmart essentially is going to give away drugs. Why? Because when you come to Walmart to pick up your drug, you're going to buy other stuff. They monetize you in a different way. Well, how are traditional pharmacies going to deal with that? So one of the ways to deal with that is they sell different values, different services to you. We're commercializing a product in the UK next year, 2012. It's called Helios, and it's going to be delivered through the pharmacy, and the pharmacist is going to sell you compliance tools. They're going to sell you a service to help you stay compliant. They're going to help you facilitate interactions with your caregivers through the use of intelligent medicines and the data streams. And who's going to pay for that? The consumer will pay for that. No added cost to the payer, no added cost to anybody else in the system. The consumer will pay for it because there's value. So coming to a couple of points that we talked about before is if you deliver value, someone will pay for it, right? So it's always about that equation. Privacy, same thing. If you deliver value, people forget, people will be lenient toward privacy, right? So it's all about value delivery in the end. And just to kind of summarize, it's consumer pay, it's monetizing the system, it's a subscription process, it's an app, there's all these different things that you can sell. And by opening the data up to third-party developers that the user will allow them to use their data, then you open up a whole ecosystem of people innovating constantly on your platform and delivering more and more value. And we're not we don't think we know the answers to everything. Actually, we know we don't know how to answer everything. But we think we have an engaging platform that people can build applications on that can be very engaging and build value through time. So emerging trends in this space. I think if you're looking forward, what's developing are a few different trends that kind of feed into a mega trend. One, we believe, is therapeutic context. I think more and more people are starting to enable therapies. You're going to see, and we already see in development, inhalers that are wirelessly enabled. Hospital systems, syringes, IV bags, all these things are going to be enabled, so we know when the therapy was delivered, and we know the physiologic response, and we can build context into how information systems are doing that. Mobile-based sensors, we talked briefly about this before, but it's using the sensors that are in people's hands today in developing countries and local, in the local places to deliver value. We can't build complex diagnostics that are sustainable in the third world. We just can't do it. So you have to use novel sensing systems to do that. Ambient assessment. This is a movement in which people are using things that are, I guess, in the background that assess how people are doing in health. So one thing is for mood disorders, people are doing some research around looking at your voice over when you do telephone calls. Well, as your mood changes, your tone changes, and we can track that through time, and we know when you're having a mood disorder. If you're bipolar, you're schizophrenic, you have withdrawal. We can measure sociability through the use of your phone. Right, so we have these predictive ways of understanding how your disease is progressing and trending that are completely invisible to the user themselves. And context awareness, this is understanding when and where to deliver the right nudges to get you to move in the right direction. And I think this is going to get built out in very sophisticated ways over time. And the real value over time is, taking all the other things, it's going to be data integration. It's a very hard problem is to get all the data in one place and build up the analysis platforms to really deliver it. And we hear about cloud-based computing and all these things. These things exist. They're cheap. They're available. It's a utility. Plug into it. Use it. Just one data point is, Medtronic has a system called CareLink, which allows them to telemetry their pacemaker information. It costs something on the order of $100 million to build that system. You could build that whole system today in 2 weeks using cloud-based services, and it would cost you nothing, essentially nothing. So I think there's a really low bar to having infrastructure in place to house data, to integrate data. The real problem becomes in analytics. What do you do with it? And I think there's a lot of value into understanding how do you bring in these multivariate streams and understand them in a meaningful way and deliver value to folks. So I just want to kind of leave you with a couple points. I've been in the shoes. I was a UCSD student, obviously, for a long time. And I just remember leaving UCSD, and I think you're going to be very well prepared. I think the education you get here, the ecosystem you have, the influences, these types of talks, just go out there and do something bold. When we started this project with the sensor system, people said it couldn't be done. You can't do it for the cost point. It's impossible. Our VCs threatened to, not fund it, because it just didn't seem like it would do it, but we managed to do it. So be bold, think broad, think big, think global. The problems that we have in the US aren't necessarily the problems that are globally relevant. So think about globally and how you can deliver value. And think about users first, right? We think about providers, how do we get reimbursement, but the real value is to the user, who's the person that's sick. You got to think about their needs. And I'll just leave you with one story that just, that this kind of really solidified this for me. Is we were doing a trial in a neuropsychiatric population, schizophrenics. We gave the system to a bunch of folks, and they used it for a long time, and then we had interviews with them to understand the value. So we expected them to say, oh, it helped me with my compliance, and we heard those things. It helped me with my sleep cycles, to regulate those things, so they're very dependent on titration. But the thing that stuck with me was kind of the intangibles. We talked to one lady who said, I said, well, what was the biggest value that you gained out of the system? She said, I can finally talk to my mom. I didn't quite understand that, and I dug a little deeper and asked her, what does that mean? She said, well, I've been sick for 10 years. Schizophrenia, basically took over my life, and my mom was always worried about me. So when she called me every day, she would only ask me one question. Did you take your med today? Did you take your med today? She hadn't had a normal conversation with her mom in 10 years. Right? Information is shared. They can talk about normal things. So these intangibles about building relationships to the caregivers, to the other people in the system, go much beyond the data, the technology. It's about the user experience. It's about the people it's about the user. So my shameless plug at the end of this. Proteus is hiring. These are just a few positions that we have, we're broadcasting right now. Digital comm engineer. Do you want to play around with the pill and come up with a communication scheme that takes us to the next generation? Does that sound interesting to you? Give me a call. We have biosignal algorithm scientists. You want to work on ECG, morphology analysis. You want to work on accelerometry. You want the multivariate data analysis, data mining, behavioral prompts. Give me a call. Web mobile developers. We're developing applications, backends, open APIs. Interns, if you just want to come hang out for a couple months, work on some things, I'm open to that as well. If you're interested in collaboration, we're very open to working out an arrangement where we'll give you smart band-aids, we'll give you our access to our API stack, we'll give you a bunch of equipment that you go and play around with stuff. So again, I'm one of these 20 followers out of this group at Forley, and there's my email if you have any questions. So, thank you.
This is what I expect of all of you once you graduate. No pressure. No pressure. Thank you so much. It was great. Any questions? Oh, hands pop up immediately. I'm going to do this one. Let's see if I can get to you.
Hi. So one of the things that a lot of other health companies that are trying to disrupt the healthcare industry have found problems with is this insurance model and doctors adopting these new disruptive technologies. And the problem being that insurance companies won't embrace these, they won't reimburse doctors for adopting them, so doctors have no incentive to try out these technologies with patients. So what is your company doing to increase doctor awareness of these types of technologies, which are much more patient-friendly and really encourage patient participation?
Yeah, I mean, the doctor is an essential part of the loop, right? I mean, and we definitely have to get there. We have to get to the point that the patients and the caregivers are engaging with the doctors on a very deep level, engaging with insurers on a very deep level. The way we're focusing on our strategy is we're walking into it as a market demonstration, really with consumers first, right? So instead of jumping across those barriers, to demonstrate value as quickly as you can in the marketplace and learn, right? So our product is CE marked and approved for sale in the UK, in Europe. We're moving into the UK next year in a consumer-centric model, with consumer pay and focusing on caregivers. We hope to demonstrate enough value in that market demonstration that doctors take notice, insurers take notice. And I'd say there is a movement also with large integrated insurers, insurance payers, providers. Kaiser Permanente is a great example. They're an investor in our company. Their former CEO sits on our board. So they understand the value of analytics. They understand the value of data. If you look at their analytics suite, they know everything about how particular therapies work, and they actually hold the upper hand in negotiations with pharmaceutical companies. They actually have better data in the field, in the real world, with efficacy of their drugs than the pharmaceutical companies do. So there are companies that, things that are facing that way. And then you're also getting a large movement about self-employed insurers. So large companies who carry on the cost themselves are investigating and working in programs to help reduce overall health costs. And a lot of that is kind of preventative things, right? So more like wellness programs, but they're starting to move into more sophisticated programs as well. So I think it's a multi-tiered approach. You got to go consumers, you got to go self-employed, insured employers, integrated provider payer networks, and doctors as well. So it's complicated. It's difficult.
So during your presentation, I was trying to understand what your technology is. You showed the bandage, and you told RFID, you told Bluetooth. So you are manufacturing chips and making them sensors, integrating
yeah, so
them
the
sensors,
core,
or you are packaging
yeah,
them?
So the main thing that our main innovation is the ingestible event marker. So it's a small ingestible sensor system, which is basically about 1 millimeter cubed, made of kind of ingestible ingredients. So everything in our ingredient list is things in your diet, and which it uses a novel power source, which is the biogalvanic power source that I explained. And that's the very key. And we can do that at a low enough cost and at a high enough scale to be basically integrate into any pharmaceutical, right? And there's a lot of folks working in smart band-aid kind of technologies, but the real key for us is that we tie that physiological information to the therapeutic information and really close the loop. And one thing I should have mentioned is, Proteus is building an ecosystem. We can't do this alone. We're a small company. We're partnered with St. Jude. We're partnered with Medtronic. They're both investors in our company. We work with Novartis. Kaiser's an investor. We're trying to develop investors in both the technology field and delivery side as well. So it's going to take time, and I think it's really building the right set of ecosystem partners to make it happen.
So just a technology question.
Sure.
So these are ingestible things, and they're sending out waves, so you have a timer chip on there, and an amplifier, and how many bytes is in here? I mean, I can't make, in my kitchen, a little circuit, so tell us how you
It's
do it.
actually it's a dirt simple, dirt's actually a good word, it's silicon, but sand simple circuit that basically is a beacon, right? So once it turns on, it's sending the same packet of information over and over again. And you basically only need about 64 bits of information to uniquely encode every pill in the supply chain, right? So you don't need a lot of information, and the thing is just broadcasting endlessly until it dies, right? So we have 5 minutes or so until while this thing is on to pick up the signal. So we have plenty of margin there. And over time, it's a platform that we have a lot of IP around onboarding sensors as well.
But maybe you can talk about the manufacturing process. I mean, there's all silicon, has all lithography, has all this technology.
Sure.
But most of it isn't made out of edible ingredients. So how do you guys create? I mean, are you laying down circuits? I mean, what's in there?
Right. So yeah, that's a very good point. Our founder and CTO, our CTO is from the MEMS world. We have a whole MEMS fab, as well as a manufacturing facility up in the Bay Area, and we deposit all the different battery materials and things ourselves in-house with proprietary processes. And it's things in their diet. You know, it's magnesium, it's copper in small traces that exist already, so it's inherently safe. And we've had I think 10,000 patient days of data so far to date without any incident.
A lot of what you presented is assumes that the effectiveness of a treatment is based on on compliance. How much of the ineffectiveness of treatment, statistically on the number of drugs, is actually
Sure.
compliance?
So it's not purely compliance, but it's compliance is a very key component of it. So, but I'll give you a couple of examples.
Your technology is about compliance.
Well, it's also about tying it's about applying therapeutic context to physiologic data streams. So it's a little bit more. So it's about titration. It's about side effect management. It's about more than just pure adherence. But I'll give you a couple of examples of adherence. Heart failure. We heard about that earlier. One of the major reasons for rehospitalization is basically fluid overload, and a lot of that is caused by either mistitration or miscompliance with your diuretics. Neuropsychiatric disorders. If you take your meds, for the most part, you're well managed. If you miss a few meds, you're more likely to miss more meds, and you go off and you have some serious effects. So I think compliance plays a key role in a lot of different areas. I mean, we have Professor Brown was here a second ago, but she's doing HIV research, and if you go beyond, I think it's like 90%, you have to be adherent with time, or your viral load goes up and you can't recover. So I mean, there are a lot of applications across a lot of therapeutic areas working in transplant and immunosuppressives. That adherence is very, very vital. But we see the use of the system beyond just compliance, and with tying in the therapy and the physiologic events and the behavioral prompts as well. So.
I have a quick question. So, Neva, I missed it in the presentation. Would you mind talking about your IP of the company?
Sure. So Proteus has over 300 filings. We actually had our fundamental patent just issued not too long ago, which is about this type of battery source in the body for anything. So, I mean, that's a very foundational thing. And it was what do you call it? A first office article or whatever. So basically the first time we went through the office, they approved it without anything. So we have a huge IP foundation. We have in-house IP lawyers. We're very, very conscious of IP in our system.
I mean, what's the technology of the IP?
So it's the power source.
Yeah.
It's coupling sensors to medicine. I mean, it's a very foundational kind of IP. So.
Are there any other questions? Yep.
I was wondering that one screen, in case we're interested in finding out more about some of the digital health movement, what are some good resources online to learn about companies similar to Proteus?
Sure, yeah. So a couple of good resources. Moby Health News is a great one. It's basically an aggregation point for all the different news going on in the field. So if you just Google Moby Health News, Rock Health is a good one. So Google that. They have a whole resource list. One blog that I like is actually a PhD student at CMU whom he maintains it. It's personalinformatics.org. So it's more tracing the personal informatics movement. And of course, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll get.
Selfless plugs.
You have some interesting partners in the company. Do they let you control the data that you're harnessing, or
so it's a complicated question, and it depends on the partner and the therapeutic areas, and it's something that it's something we need to work out with each particular partner. So, for instance, one pharmaceutical company doesn't want necessarily another pharmaceutical company to get their efficacy or safety data, right? So it's you have to work it out with each particular partner. But we hope to aggregate the data for our purposes anonymously, and use it for data mining purposes and understanding demographics and how they respond to particular therapies. Just a key point around the privacy too. our whole system is patient-centric, user-centric. So unless you give us permission, unless you give your pharmaceutical company permission, your caregiver permission, your doctor permission, no one can see your data except you. So.
Okay, well, I'm not going to force it. If there aren't any more questions.